Let's review the Data Quality Dashboard Reasonable Score. The reasonable score is a metric of whether the data present in the Transparent Utah system would pass an eyeball test. In other words, is it reasonable to have data that looks like this, either visually or from a tabular point of view? It's composed of 3 major composite scores, which each have their own composite scores underneath. There's the Yearly Spike Score, the Employee Compensation Spike Score, and the Amount Reversal Score. We'll examine each one of these scores in detail. We'll start with the Yearly Spike Score. This is a measure to determine if there are any dramatic spikes in yearly revenue, expenditure, or payroll submitted to Transparent Utah. We can see for our test entity that there are no major spikes and everything looks good. To examine the report that creates the score, we would click this Yearly Total Analysis, scroll down, or select it in the Jump To section. When we look at this report, we're immediately shown 3 graphs, based on the total submitted by fiscal year. We see the expenditure data, the revenue data, and the payroll data. If we would like to break this data down by quarter, we can select the Show Quarters button. Now when we hover over, we can see each quarter's total. For example, we can see that in 2015 there was a lot of activity in April and June, but as long as there's no dramatic jumps or shifts, everything looks good in this report. Let's now select the Employee Compensation Report. This is the basis for the Employee Compensation Spike Score shown here. We can see that our entity received a score of 50% in the Employee Review and Major Difference Spike scores. Let's find out why. In this report, we're given a summary and we're told that the following employees have been flagged for volatility, and these ones also need reviewed. So let's look them up. In this case, we'll look up Austin L. Christofferson and examine his employee compensation data. So I'll select the individual employee search, and then when it comes to selecting an employee, I'll enter in the name of our worrisome employee. After I select Austin's name, I'm able to view his compensation data at a glance. We can see the total amount by fiscal year, and I can pretty quickly see something strange went on in 2016 or something strange went on in 2017, because we wouldn't expect a sudden drop to be usual. This may indicate some of his data was not submitted, or there could be a completely valid reason why this is the case. Maybe he moved out of the state for a year and then came back, or who knows what. Regardless, we need an explanation for why this data is this way. If the reason for this inconsistency is simply that data was omitted, you'll need to upload a new compensation report that includes this employee's data. If there's a valid reason why the data is not present, you'll need to email the Transparent Utah team so they can create a data quality exemption for that employee to adjust this score. We're able to view the various components of the score and see where the changes occurred as well. In this case in the entity, nothing fishy is going on in the changes, it just seems like the total percentage went down. Let's now look at the final component, which is the Amount Reversal Score. Let's return to the top of the page to review how it's calculated. The Amount Reversal Score is a scale measuring if any fiscal years had too many monies that were reversals, or negative values. In the Transparent Utah system, all values are supposed to be positive, including revenues and expenditures. Sometimes accounting software will make one of these values positive or negative, despite the value needing to be positive in all cases, unless it's a reversal. So what we do is we check for negative numbers, because these will throw off the totals. The idea is that the expenditure, revenue, and payroll shouldn't have too many negative numbers, otherwise there might be an issue. We can see here that payroll looks fine, but revenue and expenditure might have some issues. We see a revenue score of 50% and an expenditure score of 75%. Let's see how that score was calculated by going to the Amount Reversals report. In this report, we're able to filter by fiscal year and type, and we can look at the net amount or the number of transactions. We can see here for this entity that there's a fairly high percentage of expenditures that were negative and also that had a negative net amount. And the same thing goes for revenue. This looks high. Now you might say, well, maybe this isn't high. Maybe this is just the standard. So what we do is we compare across entities of a similar size to see if this is reasonable. And that's what this benchmark comparison is doing. It's looking and comparing the selected entity across other entities of a similar size and government type. So, in this case, we're comparing across different cities of a similar size and cluster. And what we see here is that our selected entity is doing okay for most years. These years in green are perfect because they are below the median of cities of a similar size. This yellow band is indicating that the city is above the median but below the 75th percentile. You can view this yellow area as a warning, since your entity is above the median and also because your entity is beginning to approach the unacceptable red band. If you are in the red, you're between the 75th percentile and the max, which will earn your entity a score of 0. So, green gives you a score of 1, yellow gives you a score of 0.5, and red gives you a score of 0 for that year. Then, for all the years where there is data, those scores are added up and averaged. So, this entity would earn a 0.5, 0.5, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and a 0. Those values would be summed, then divided by 8, which is the number of fiscal years of data. The result would be the expenditure score. The goal here is to ensure there's not too many reversals or negative values. And remember that you can review the same reports for payroll and revenue. You are also able to view a table of data which corresponds to this plot. So I would recommend to this test entity that they examine years 2015 and 2021 and ensure that there aren't too many negative values. If there's a legitimate reason for these negative values, the entity is welcome to email the Transparent Utah team to request a data quality exemption, which can be done if there's a valid reason to have this many negative values. You can now analyze your reasonable score. It's the most complicated score, but also the easiest to understand, because something will be visually amiss in one of these 3 reports, whether that's the yearly spike, the employee compensation, or the amount reversals.